All right, so yeah, hi everyone. Welcome to the fifth preliminary round of IVED 2023. My name is Chia. I'll be the chair judge for this round. So judging with me will be Alvin from Unpri and also Melinda from Unhas. We're going to debate under the motion this House supports the significant and widespread implementation of restorative justice in criminal justice system courts. Without further ado, I'd like to call upon the first speaker to start the debate. Don't forget to check your sound, time yourself. I will help, but no promises. I might forget that in the middle. So yeah, for the first speaker of affirmative, the floor is yours. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep, you're audible.
I'm going to start my speech in three, two, one. An eye for an eye will make the world blind. We think it is time for human civilization to leave our primal desire for vengeance behind and opt into more civil, peaceful, and restorative approach in our legal system. Government supports the wide, significant, and widespread implementation of restorative justice in criminal justice courts. This looks like more and more legal bodies recommend peaceful resolution between victim and perpetrator of crime outside the criminal court and give them recommendations and access to mediating actors in the hope of restoring the prior condition to the criminal action. Or more judges, juries, or other bodies in the criminal court give punishment with the goal and focus of rehabilitating the perpetrator, preventing recidivism, and addressing the root factor of crime, rather than favoring things like retribution. This looks like more and more people get lesser prison sentence in favor of community service, rehabilitation, or fines that is less likely to create long-term damage to their future opportunity, and etc. A little bit of clarification as housekeeping. Widespread implementation and adoption does not mean restorative justice will be applied in a blanket manner. In a sense, judges, juries, and other legal bodies will still retain their ability to do cost, benefit, or risk analysis. Therefore, I don't think this debate should talk about like the worst version of crime, such as sexual assault, murder, or terrorism, because we, average reasonable person, and legal system understand that for some cases we should not apply restorative justice. Those are the cases, especially in the cases where restorative justice will not reach the end goal of rehab and compensation or reparation. For example, in cases where victims are very sensitive and vulnerable, therefore we should limit their interaction or even protect them from even meeting or be in hundreds of meters from the perpetrator. Or in cases of terrorism and mass murder, that is very obviously too risky for us to let them loose in the society. I don't think this debate should talk about those. We should focus on the majority of crime, that is the crime of accusation, theft, or other smaller scale conflict that are still reconcilable. Second clarification, how may talk about pressure or power relation in a mediation process? Two things to say. First, I think there's counterbalance. We have mediator, attorney, or advisor. They will understand that in the eye of law, everyone will have equal right and advocate for their victim and prevent external power to do pressure on whatnot in a mediating process. I think these are relatively accessible. Understandably, we have more and more pro bono law service out there, right? Secondly, even if the pressure still exists somehow, we think that the fact that they are able to use their pressure, despite we have the current counterbalance mechanism, most likely these individuals are probably very strong anyway, and they will be able to use this power anyway to influence the court mechanism. For example, people like Freddy Sambo. So at worst, we think that the harm of pressure is symmetrical under both sides of the house if we're talking about like those powerful individuals. The delta then should not be these worst cases of individual that have all the power in the world to pressure their opponent. But I think this debate should focus on which side could maximize the chances for victims to get benefit as much as possible and are able to restore their prior condition. We think this is achievable in our side. We gave them more choice and agency for them because they no longer have the limited option that is only to put perpetrators in jail or them getting fines. But furthermore, I think this debate also should focus on how do we rehabilitate perpetrators and prevent future recidivism. First argument, why restorative justice is just. We posit that the government's legal body and instrument of justice should opt into restorative justice way of sentencing and proceeding, as it is much more just in comparative to more punitive, retributive, centric, or tough on crime philosophy. Several reasons. First, understand that the majority of crime are the result of government inadequacy in fulfilling their obligation. For example, crimes of acquisition happens because government fails to provide opportunity and basic necessities to community, and as such, some of these people are forced to resort to crime to fulfill their basic need. Even in crimes like murder, assault, etc., they often also happens due to government's failure to provide adequate and accessible services for people that are facing mental health struggle, for example, or maybe the fact that most of murder is attributed to organized crime, such as gangs and such, that is also rooted from government's failure to provide economic opportunity. Thus, as a compensation and reparative mechanism for government inadequacy, they have the duty to prioritize giving rehabilitation and ensuring better life for these criminals afterward, because they have failed them in the past and they need to ensure they do not obtain again into the crime. I cannot say, but not all poor people still. We need to acknowledge that people have different capacity to control themselves. They have different capacity to and ability to hold the pain of hunger, for example. Therefore, we cannot punish these people that apparently succumb to the pain and do the crime, as those people cannot fight against the randomly assigned capacity to hold the pain that is outside of their control. But furthermore, second analysis, we're stumbling upon new researches that suggest human doesn't really have much control on their life. We are dictated by the genetically assigned hormonal balance. We have the neural network structure that make in our brain that decide everything for us. That is oftentimes predisposed and changes from time to time without our consent or control. Thus, mostly our decision is not ours. It is the decision made arbitrarily by our brain, not by our consciousness. And probably most humans realize what they just did 15 seconds after their action. And understand, these researchers point out that we do not really have any agency or form of free will. Therefore, given this new data and understanding, I think it is very stupid for us, human civilization, to ignore this and still focus on the medieval way of punishing and believe that understandably that we now know we individuals cannot control their life. Therefore, it is unjust to punish them for what they cannot control. As such, restorative justice is the most just, and its adoption and widespread should be celebrated. Second issue, catering to grievances of victim. Understand that retribution-focused legal philosophy that solely based on focusing and based on punishing criminal doesn't really care about victim condition, and probably is not what the victim wants. Understand, we cannot generalize what are the victims' demand. I believe that a lot of victims just want to get over with the case and get some proper and other form of compensation other than wanting to put criminals in jail. Understand, a lot of victims, even after getting their perpetrator into prison, still have trauma. At best, even if they relieve their grudge temporarily, we don't think it's a sustainable benefit, as they still probably have long-term trauma and such. Comparative, under our side, we care more about victim as we give more flexibility to decide what are their demands in the reconciliation. We think that it is also more likely that they to restore the preconditions and such, etc. But even if we ignore the wishes of the victim and that the criminals should be punished hard or be put to jail, it is fine. Because even in status quo, we have limitations, for example, in place. For example, the max amount of sentence someone can get or whatever. But furthermore, it is impossible to cater to all of the wishes of the victim. That is why we have criminal court and judge that decide which part of the lawsuit is granted or whatnot. Lastly, we proceed that we tackle crime better. We proceed that rehab and other goals of sentencing, such as retribution or protecting the society, is mutually exclusive with rehab and cannot coexist. Prolonged jail time and worse living condition nullify the benefit of mental rehab. Even if not, there is things like failure to keep up with time or the fact that prisoners are de-skilled when they get out of prison, and furthermore, all of that. What you will see in OP is that prisoners will still have the reason as to why they commit crimes that they did. There will be more recidivism and future exposure of society to more crimes, and as such, very proud to propose.
All right, I think the first speaker from the affirmative, just a gentle reminder, everyone, 8 minutes and 20 seconds are the maximum one. And for one observer, Ops Rizky Siaga. I need your cooperation to rename yourself according to the format. Ops underscore your institution and then underscore, yeah, your name, Rizky Siaga. Thank you. All right, first negative for the responses. The floor is yours.
Great. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Thank you for the clarification. Give me a second. Okay. All right.
Sorry, Rizky, before you move on. For one observer with only full stop, can you please rename yourself immediately? And for Rizky Siaga, once again, if not, for the Orcom, yeah, Reza and Natasha, feel free to kick them out. Thank you. Okay, Rizky, you can continue.
All right. Thank you so much for the confirmation. He, him, if you want to address me in like future like responses or yeah, whatever. Great. Starting in 3, 2, and 1. One thing under opposition that we want to posit first, right? Let's set this debate up. Several things that hasn't been addressed by Prime Minister. So what did we tell you? What is the issue with like significant and widespread implementation of restorative justice? 3 things that you have to remember regarding restorative justice. Number 1, the usage of restorative justice is determined by the criminal justice system to solve crime cases, but it's also according to every state's culture. So regardless whether or not you're leaning conservative or not, then most likely the approach will still be restorative justice that's leaning conservative, for example, etc. So even if in conservative states, cases like sexual harassment or abuse are pursued sometimes using restorative justice because A, they see this as something that is pursuable by restorative justice. So government does not have the fear to say that, oh no, we're not going to solve this under our, we're not going to pursue this with restorative justice. It's subjective according to every state. They have to bite that bullet. But number 2, you have to understand the parameter of success for restorative justice relies on whether or not both sides have agreed to solve the case. So however this, even if, for example, like both parties agrees, this most of the time still comes with the expense of people persuading victims to forgive perpetrators. This means like pressure from the family, for example, pressure from external society that's conservative, etc. But number 3, you have to understand restorative justice does not put criminal track records on possible convicts and criminals. This is the biggest issue, or this is the biggest determining retributive thing that exists in the current criminal justice system, but this is taken away the moment that is enabled by restorative justice. This is exactly because mediation is often put as like confidential. So mediation settlement agreements are always kept confidential. There is no results that is like exposed to the public, exactly why it's always kept private. We've already told you, deposit you these 3 things that's very important regarding restorative justice. This enough is already proved to you as to how problematic it is and how subjective it is. We'll proceed to explain this later in like my principle. All responses or like responses towards like government side of the house will be, in my argumentation. So I have one major thing to talk about here. Why is the restorative justice completely problematic, and why does this not fulfill the principle of the criminal justice system? There is going to be a little bit of practical here, so keep an eye out on that. I have several layers, right? The first layer, let's talk about like the parameter of justification that's ideal for this debate. I think that you should credit this the most. They haven't explained to you why it's okay to pardon with this, right? 3 things. Number 1, when you do crime, it's not that you only do certain impacts towards certain people or certain victims, but you also do it to the state. This is because like there is a law that has already been implemented by the state, and you choose actively to want to go against that law. Necessarily, in the process of you trying to get back or try to like commend yourself or like trying to fix your reputation or whatever the hell, then most likely what you have to do is also give back to the state. But number 2, you have to understand that the ultimate principle of the criminal justice system is proportionality. Is that you ought to be punished according to your respective crimes. This means that if you are punished through hurting someone physically, then you need to be jailed as a proportionate ultimate form of punishment. If you try to do embezzlement or money laundering because you have a very huge, for example, like material power, then most likely what you have to be do is that your assets should be, for example, taken away, or your money should be frozen, for example, for you to not be able to use it anymore. But number three, what is the parameter of justification? Is that there is an existing alternative that we're going to prove to you why it's already progressive, but understand in the current status quo that prisons are already demanded to be reformed. For example, there are different types of like demands from society that our current prison is already like overcapacitated for example, or like that it's just inherently bad or it doesn't do anything. I think that the awareness already exists, therefore alternative exists. But second layer, what is the problem and why does this exist under their side of the house, right? Three things. Number one, you have to understand that it's not justified because it doesn't give back to the state at all. So even if you want to pursue like restorative justice, then it only probably solves this case on a smaller basis. But there's not necessarily nothing done to the fact that they've already actively tried to go against the law that has already been made by the state. But number two, it's also not proportional because you are not hurting the most capable agency or power that they have. This means that exactly people in the current status quo go away with monetary crimes, for example, because their money are not taken away. They're able to silence other people, for example, to not speak up regarding these crimes, for example, for instance. So they cannot say that under government side of the house that, oh, there will not be any like types of like, imbalance of power, etc. No, trust that, especially when they try to say that this is most likely going to be in a monetary cases or etc. Mostly people are going to do it to silence other people. Understand that you may not see it explicitly in front of your eyes, for example, but it most likely will happen behind the scenes. But number three, I think that the issue is that you have to understand that there is a current existing like awareness when it comes to like prison systems. This means that most likely there are already demand for like better prison, etc., etc. You have to understand that the usage of what do you call this, restorative justice necessarily inhibits it from developing, necessarily shuts down the awareness of people for trying to engage into like the reformation of the prison system, right? Third layer then. So what happens under this side of the house? So regardless of the effects or the verdict of the restorative justice, so this is going to engage to directly their best case scenario and the worst case scenario. Two things. Number one, you have to understand that investigation in restorative justice will most likely be done personally by the victims who are underprivileged. This may be done because like this may be done by authorities that are not necessarily that good. This means that they use their own personal capacity to be able to solve their cases. They don't go through like years of law school, for example. They're not a trained lawyer, but you force them to actively try to solve their issues on their own. This is something that's completely bad. Eventually, what happens is that they come up with a very unclear, irrational decision that eventually creates like injustice between the victim and the perpetrator, for example, because most likely the parameter of success is for the perpetrators to actually want to concede, which usually takes a lot of compromisation. But number two, you have to understand that the victims and their families to begin with do not want to meet these people. Why the hell would I want to meet people who have already assaulted me, for example, or tried to hurt me in the past, and then try to resolve that case with them when I expected them to actually get punished or like jailed or whatever happens to them? Understand that not only that, you're actively trying to shut down the victims, for example, needs. You're trying to force them to go through this process of mediation. But number two, even if, for example, they want to meet, for example, and try to solve this case, at the end of the day, it's most likely they're going to be forced, for example, by the system that actually tries to enable the existence of like restorative justice. This proves that two things. Number one, they only want to solve it as soon as possible because they think that this is the only feasible way out of the of the case, for example. But number two, they also will always come to a bad conclusion, for example, even if they try to do their whole argumentation regarding how there's going to be lawyers that exist under like every part of like restorative justice. That's not only always the case, because this is probably not recognized as like a legal procedure in some states, especially when it's like more conservative. So understand, that's exactly why it's not justified. But let's extend this a bit regarding like, why is it better on our side of the house? Why is there an alternative? What type of alternative are we talking about? There is increasing demand of the betterment of prison, the development of like criminal justice system pillars, for example. This is like two things. Number one, there is a push to reform. There is like the rise of left wing, for example, reformation that demands the existence of like Scandinavian leaning prison systems, for example, where prisons are treated more humanely. They also like question the the existence of police brutality, for example. Therefore, the question or the urge for this system to actually reform is actually there and it's actually big. But number two, a lot of private prisons actually want to bid to the government because they want their prisons to be used, for example. So exactly what they have to do with that is they have to convince the government that the prisons are going to be good. This means that the development of facilities that within the prison has to be good as well. That's why alternative exists, proud to oppose.
All right, I think the first speaker from the negative for that speech. Yeah, to extend affirmatives, I call upon the second speaker of affirmative. Here.
Hi, just checking, am I both audible and visible?
Yes, audible and also visible.
All right. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Prison concept is breaking what is already broken. Restorative justice is fixing what is broken. These two different conceptions resulting into the great different twisted results of how people perceive the perpetrators are not the only one who are culpable in this evil world full of sufferers, disappointment, and grievances. It's also changed the way victims perceive that not every problem could be solved just because someone went into the little box that we call as a jail. The nuance that negative miss in this round is that oftentimes the criminal investigation and the research process behind it finish in the momentum when the perpetrator went into the jail already. Law enforcement perceive that victims will be 100% happy and the trauma is like simsalabim being cured. Affirmative clearly reject this notion. Two things that I'll talk about. First, protection for the victim. Second, I'll talk about the deterrence effects. So firstly, let's talk about protection for the victims, right? Before that though, I just want to clarify something. I would suggest that this is not a proposal motion. So I think like it's unfair for the LO to say that, oh, possible negotiation wouldn't be successful because probably the family will not meet the people who persecute you or the people who did violence to you in the first place. We say we have the fiat in the likelihood because when we try to make it accessible and support it to the society in one interim, for instance, there would be a lot of discussions, there would be a lot of normalization, there would be exist in terms of this formal processes of doing the restorative justice discussion in the first place, right? And open up for more chances for negotiations. If not, then there would be going back to the CGS in the extreme case such as murdering, for instance. In the extreme case, when you cannot forgive the perpetrator like sexual assault or even like sexual harassment, we would stick in the context where the CGS would mostly apply. So this debate is not all about extreme cases or the worst case of the really, really evil crime actions, but instead it's more the moderate one. Stealing, for instance, violence, robbery, and all those particular things that is not being engaged at all by the rest of the house. First issue then, let's talk about protection for the victims. They said that the case is incredibly subjective, so that we need to defend given in our worst case scenarios, even if in the worst criminal momentum. The problem, sure, even if we need to take the bullets on the specific criminal action like sexual assault, we're happy to take these bullets in saying that when the perpetrators going into the jail is not changing the condition of the victims at all when you have less accessibility to the therapy in their ward, because police consider the case is done and you get internal satisfaction after the perpetrator got into the jail. Here's what changing under our sort of house. Sure, even if you might compromise the perpetrator, but this is still something that is comparatively better compared to in their side when one, in the process of reconstruction, the victims of the trauma would need to remember their trauma all the time, the grievances of sexual harassment people, for instance. So even if therapy is accessible in their side, but it's not effective because it's contradicting within the courting process. But second, process is like longer in their side because of the lacking of evidence. Like, probably things such as sexual assault happen in like close place. Therefore, in this particular case, there might be a loss of disappointment in the court result, resulting into how those perpetrator could actually go away and counter-swing you in the first place. That is also bad for the most vulnerable actor in here, right? Because they might don't have the great lawyer, for instance, they might not have the great capacity to defend themselves in their side of the house. So I think it's better in our word when you pre-consider the decision and considering to actually emphasizing more on your rehabilitations, emphasizing more on your traumas, rather than trying to pursue justice in the case of where you might be disappointed within the result of it. But second, they say that victims would be pressured to go into the mediation anyway because of irrational. The problem within this claim is that they never explain why going to the court is a good option in the comparative, because insofar as the conceptual problems of inequality in between the courts still existing, I would suggest the result would be also disappointed and would be create even worse inequality in the rest of the house in between the victims and the perpetrator. Therefore, if they cannot prove why there's a balancing bargaining power in the case of where we need the better lawyer or better advocacy for the victims themselves, there would be no delta that you get in the rest of the house. Or how, when you could get massive protections of their rehabilitations that you could access in the rest of the house, I would suggest that this is not particularly within the interest of the victims. Therefore, you probably got almost no particular benefit in their side. Second issue, let's talk about the deterrency effect, because the vast majority of their case considered and concentrated on this premise, right? They say that, but we will bring the proportionality in between the punishment. I would suggest that the vast majority of the individuals, except the most evil one, obviously like murderers, sexual offenders, and robbers, are oftentimes did the crimes not because they want to. Again, there's no engagement in it, but because they have no choice to do so. When you have the limited food stock supply because you were not able to gain money, because you were born in an incredibly poor family, you cannot access things such as education, so your moral compass is not well established. You cannot access new skills except being blue-collar workers on daily-to-daily basis, because you have no access to enrich your knowledge and expand your ability. In that sense, there is no need for you to punish this individual, because even if we took their best, the deterrence is oftentimes misallocated. And why this is a bad thing? One, like obviously the lives from the poor is already miserable. After that, they need to go to the prison, competing for foods, fighting over criminals that even intensify their suffers in their world. But sure, in other scenarios, if the prison is fulfilling the prosper and good standard, oftentimes these are not the prison for the vulnerable actor, but instead is exclusive for people like politicians, where you can even order pizza delivery inside of this fancy prison. So this is not a tangible response. Second, I would point out that if you went already into the jail, it prevents you to gain the further survivability, because no companies or institutions specifically want to recruit the ex-criminals as the part of their institution, because there's a huge stigmatization that overtly glorify until the part even when the punishment is over. You still have no capacity to face the devil atmosphere coming from the society that wants to excommunicate you as an individual. Even if sure, there might be. But again, this is type of company that is far more exploitative, that wants incredibly cheap labor, by their own calculation, private prison for instance, ignoring the insurance and specific protection for the most vulnerable actor in here. Therefore, the conclusion is, prison conventional system is generalizing that everyone deserves no second chance, even in the smallest crime. So no proportionality when you generalize every types of crimes could be solved by just being put into the jails in the first place, and there's no certain resurgence to the victims at all. But what changed under our world? In our world, we changed the way perpetrators are being reconciled in the society. We emphasize the human aspect from the perpetrator and tell society that not everyone did the crimes because of the agency, because of there's a strong motive that influenced their brains, like trauma, broken home conditions, and everything. That's why even some people might become aggressive, did violence or something. But society in our world wouldn't be the Anubis who judge you all the time, but instead it will be open up for a way of resolve to solve this problem altogether. Try to help the poor people by doing more intense charity. Try to adhere and listen to the condition of the people who are mentally broken. Being more cautious in the way you behave and in the way you speak. Therefore, in conclusion, even if the criminals are not reduced in number because of deterrence effect on our social house, but is being reduced in number because of the communal empowerment mechanization. And why this is a good thing? Because this brings the real prospect to the most vulnerable actor in here, probably the excommunicado, or probably the criminals themselves, who probably find it struggles to find the rehabilitation that they want to achieve even after they went out to the prisons. But the second thing that they point out is that but it will be far more elitist. Probably for some individuals, they could get away from their crimes easily, things such as money bribery and all the stuff. I would point out, if the criminals are being hard, if the criminal actions that they took is harming the vast majority of society, especially in a large scale, things such as corruption, things such as tax evasion, or things such as tax evasion or tax avoidance, I would suggest the society would still have the initiative to condemn those particular things, because there is no certain mechanisms how you could reconcile within the society, right? This debate is oftentimes happen in the individual scale. So if they want to bring the criminals in macro scale, I would suggest that this person is still being persecuted anyway in our sort of house because of the active and intense scale of the harms that is being caused by the society in a larger scale. So again, I don't think like this is the most important discussion that you need to understand. Therefore, based on those two reasons, I think like the most important part is to bring the rehabilitations to the victims and to actually educate the way those individuals should react and the way the criminals should be contributive back in the society even after their punishment is over. Based all those reasons, you must propose.
All right, I think the second speaker from the affirmative side of the house. Next, I call upon the second speaker from the negative side to extend the negative case. Here.
Hi, can I be here?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Yeah, since this is this recorded? Yeah, this is recorded. Okay, so I think a disclaimer is necessary. Like, I don't mean like some things in the speech only for the purpose of this debate. I promise I'm not that horrible now. Yeah, also shout out to all the observers. You guys are making it fun. Okay. An eye for an eye makes the world blind. That's a nice rhetoric, but I want to note that this rhetoric cannot win this debate. Ask yourself this moral question, judges. Insofar as we allow perpetrators to run free with minimum consequences, insofar as we prevent weak individuals from seeking out justice, insofar as those losing their closest people because of random assaults cannot see protection and solace, and insofar as we start blaming other things for the things that we have complete information and agency to act upon, maybe, just maybe, we deserve to be blind. Perhaps we have, like that side of the house, been blind all this time. Three questions that I seek to address in this speech. The first is whether or not this is a fundamental principle of the justice system. The second is obviously throughout the process, why will we suggest that you harm vulnerable people? Lastly, just a bit of an extension, why do we make poor system in criminal justice fundamental? Before that, two pieces of framing. The first thing I want to talk about, and I want to note that I hate the first thing that Ryan said, other than the eye for an eye. That's a good one. Is that they will not extend to the worst crime. Then we question where is the likely benefit in their side of the house then, right? Because presumably the victims lose the most of the things that they claim they can compensate in the worst crime that they unwisely excluded from the application of this debate. But we're still gonna engage with that, bro. Let's just listen to that. I just want to point out that that's a weird misconception on their side. But secondly, I don't want to make it like the criminal law principle class. I got B+ in that goddamn class. But understand something: when you lose your purse and the thief is captured and the thief is sent to prison, you are still paid. Your purse is still returned to you. So I don't understand the material loss that it's gonna be like the important weighing or an important tipping point that their side of the house can provide that our side of the house cannot provide. That's just basic law principle. That's empirically true. The first question that I seek to address is this a fundamental principle of the justice system? And I want to note previously that this is already independently debate winning if we win this class because of two reasons. Number one, every impacts in this debate are quite speculative. Principle is thought. Don't discount this principle just because it's a principle, right? Law is never utilitarian. I agree. You inflict pain to someone who inflicted pain. So it's mostly negative utility, but it doesn't really matter. Fundamentally, this is an a priori conception of justice that we ought to dive into. There's absolutely no reason why we ought to abandon this for uncertain benefit that it might exist, might not exist in that side of the house. But secondly and empirically, when making decisions and verdicts, judges has never made any pragmatic consequences. If you look up that Directory website in your Google right now, there's never been a decision that says, I give this kind of person this punishment because I want him to see the future one day. There's never been like that. The only implication and the only weighing is on material justice and law application that is applicable towards a particular case. So a fundamental principle is important. Three things we claim in opposition. The first is that fundamentally, a crime is not only done against the victim, but a crime is done against the state. I.e., when you logically, this is true, right? I.e., theft make the environments substantially less safe. School shooting causes investors signaling to go wrong because people think that area is not particularly safe. They don't want to invest on that. But also empirically, the state is also quite harmed. That's why in a criminal case, it's the state of Missouri versus Justin Jabriel in that particular world, for example. Not that the victim versus the perpetrator. There's a civil case. That's a different debate. Second principle that we introduced is proportionality. And I think this creates a win of the debate, right? I think people who did crime ought to be punished according to their crime. Why is this already winning? And here I want to address the weird principle came from God. The first thing we told you was that the victim is already failed by the state, and therefore the state owed the obligation towards the victim to give the fulfillment. Well, the response that we heard from PM and DPM was that, but government failed the perpetrators too. They do that because of the government. This is the horrible response. Not everyone does that, even when they're poor. Not everyone steals because they're poor. The impression that poor people will always do crime is a disgusting sentiment that we ought not apply in this debate. CGS does not only punish the bad, CGS rewards the good. But even if I ignore everything that my lecturers told me in these 3 years, people who do crime out of necessity or self-defense will either be punished much less or even not going to be unpunished in our side of the house. So insofar as there is a certain motive that might be a mitigating factor, all those stuff, we will still have justice material. But secondly, right, I think just proportionality prevents you from punishing the innocent people. So if it's true that you punish bad people more and less bad people less, it logically means that you don't punish innocent people at all. And insofar as we protect innocent people, that's probably the principle of justice system that we ought abide. But the last thing I want to do is I want to address the death threats and rehabilitation from that side of the house. The first thing I want to say is I want to discount this because you have no epistemic access. Each individuals have unique access to treat punishment, and what they learn from particular punishment is empirically true. We're just people talking shit for 8 minutes, oddly, without fucking interruptions. So we cannot necessarily understand whether or not people will be better rehabilitated using prison or restorative justice. But even if you don't buy that, I think prison and conventional punishment work. The counterfactual in our side is not bad prison that I think Goff Bench defensively argued, but prison reforms that are likely because of 3 reasons. Number one, there are large push of left-wing populists to reform due to access to information like San Pedro and Scandinavian model. Number two, bad cars are already voted against by the majority of people because of the resurging wave of BLM and anti-police brutality. But lastly, we told you about private prisons. Private prisons that are rampant right now, they're likely to appeal to government tender. You are likely to offer better facility, therefore you get the tender. To begin with, you're likely to offer better facility for prisoners. I want to note that the progress is massively hampered in Gulf for the people who will still go to prison in their side because of 2 reasons. Number one, you lose a lot of voting blocks. But number two, you lose a lot of spotlight and the push for the change to happen quite worse within their side of the house. In principle, we already win fundamentally. Number two, throughout the process, we suggest that this harm vulnerable people more. This is also independently debate winning because regardless of the speculative final verdict, this argument already wins. You heard abysmal analysis from that side of the house where you can get equal and fair punishment. We told you 3 mechanisms. Number one, I posit that the mediation process where the victim has to meet face-to-face with the perpetrator is very harmful. We're comparatively better in court because of 2 reasons. Number one, like investigation done in your side of the house is going to be on your own, right? Because necessarily that's what happens in a civil mediation procedure. You have more costs, you have more time. But secondly, mostly the victims are uncomfortable to meet, right? The obvious response is that, some will want to. Once more, you have no academic access. You have to err on the side of caution to make sure that the victims who don't want to meet their perpetrators are protected. In court, then you can be defended by public defenders. You don't need to see the people who killed your friend. The second thing we told you was that government cannot play in a case where they always succeed. We say it's most likely to fail because of 3 reasons. And this veto we claimed by Brian in that horrible claim. Number one, you have irrationality. Literally, your friend has just been murdered by someone. You have short-term and proximity biases. This is also true because of statute of limitation. A criminal case has to be processed before there's a due time on that case. Secondly, just logically, you have very conflicting interests, right? It's unclear why either of them want to compensate for one another, particularly when they hate one another. But lastly, mediation is short. You can extend, but this is going to be much more costly. They want to solve it as soon as possible. When they fail, the powerful, often the perpetrator's interest will be fulfilled because of 2 reasons. Number one, you're more likely to have less evidence because you have to do the investigation by yourself. Powerful people have more bargaining power. You don't have enough evidence to make conviction. The obvious response is good lawyer, but at least you have more objective accountability in court. But secondly, often victims just want the process to end, right? They have more proximate concerns. They don't want to waste more time and more cost. In your side of the house, then it will result into the powerful figures in their side because you have no accountability. Just shortly on the last thing. Why do we make that worse progress fundamentally? This is also debate winning because criminal justice is always striving to make itself better in the future, right? 3 mechanisms that is harm undergo. The first is that mediation, as in any alternative dispute resolution, is confidential in nature. Settlement is not available for public. This has 4 implications. A, you have no reference for future case. B, similar victims from the similar cases cannot discuss because of the existence of the NDA. C, judge and jury cannot intervene. You have no accountability. And lastly, society cannot condemn, right? Society cannot condemn a particular perpetrator because necessarily, you don't have the access to see what is in that. But lastly, I want to flip DPM here because what they say is that society will not stigmatize perpetrator. I want to flip this by saying that society will be even more scared because he literally killed someone yesterday and now he's here and I don't know what he did so that he is here right now at this point. I don't have access to see what is in the mediator settlement agreement. So criminal justice is worse. Panels, we don't mind being blind physically. We refuse to be blind to injustice. negate.
I thank the second speaker from the negative for that speech. For final responses against the negative, I call upon the third affirmative. Here.
Check. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, sebentar ya. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think the problem with side opposition is that they only want to engage the worst case of our case, right? What are they? LO's accusation that power imbalance will always happen, which my PMS outframe as unimportant because it's less likely to happen due to the existence of counterbalance such as neutral mediator or attorney, for instance. Or at worst, even if that's the case, the super powerful individual could also influence the court under side opposition. That's why I think that worst case is symmetrical on both sides. Don't use this as the delta to weigh in the debate, right? But secondly, I think that LO also accuse us that victims will be too clueless to deal with negotiation because they don't go to law school, for instance. I think that this is irrelevant and they don't listen to Rian's speech, who have told you that attorney exists to give you legal advices, right? This counterbalance is also affordable because pro bono legal services are widely accessible, even for the poor in the current status quo. Notice how LBH exists to give you, free legal advices and, give and free legal advices throughout your solving your case, right? I think that this is an unimportant concern from their side of the house. Thirdly, they told you how there's going to be no transparency. Several responses. I think that this is negotiation based, meaning that they could choose to publish mediation process, right? If they choose to do so. So therefore, I think that transparency can also exist on the other side. But even if they don't want to publish their, their case solvency, for example, it's okay because that's what people want. And I think that this is the most important thing because we cater to the needs of of people directly involved in these cases, right? Which is something that's not catered to under side opposition because you don't really listen to what people needs in criminal justice system court, right? But I think that the harms of non-transparency like bribery is the worst case that you should not weigh in this debate. I think that Brian has also told you this before, but I think that sensitive cases like sexual assault are also kept confidential by default according to law, right? This is what happens in Indonesia, for instance. Therefore, I think that side opposition should also defend the case of in transparency that exists in their side in several cases. Why are those any difference with what happens in our case at the worst case scenario, right? From those explanation, understand how there are two worst case bases in their in this debate and doesn't want to charitably engage to our more moderate case, right? They should lose because they took an extreme stance in this debate. So several issues then. First issue in regards to victim interest. I think that this is an important issue because obviously victims are the one who got harmed by, the most in crime cases. They are the one who got trauma and property damage, for instance. That's why the discussion in this debate should have revolved around their needs, right? Because they are the most vulnerable actor that they should protect. What have we told you in regards to victim needs fulfillment? Two things. One, we've told you how victims probably only needs on the intense therapy in subjective approach compared to justice for the perpetrators because seeing those people going into prison doesn't revoke your trauma and grievances, right? But secondly, we've also told you how the court process is too long and in their side, they will continuously reveal their trauma and even emphasize the worst part. What did they told you in regards to this? Firstly, they talk about how victims would get silenced by money and won't get any benefit at all. I think there's no problem at all to this because of several reasons. I think that it's not that it's a one-way bribery from the perpetrator to silence the victims, for example. I think that the outcome of giving money to victims is the result of discussion between those victims and the perpetrator. I think that when it's the result of discussion, you've also taken into account the needs of those victims. So therefore, I think that it's not a bribery. You cannot consider this as bribery if the victims also want to get money as a form of repairment to their condition that has been damaged by the crime, right? But B, I think that satisfaction of victims cannot be generalized on your side of the house, because not everyone want to see criminals simply put to jail while those victims still left suffering with trauma and material damages, right? That's why you should give people flexibility to choose what are the important things to them through negotiation that happens under our side of the house, right? Because we understand that you cannot generalize all victims' needs, and you should give them the flexibility to decide whatever they want, whatever they need to, recover from their grievances and trauma, which are caused by the crimes, right? I think that. Okay, so secondly, they also talk about how victims doesn't want to meet perpetrator, which will also, hamper the solvency of crimes through our mechanism, right? Several responses. One, I think that this also happens under their side, because notice how victims are usually invited to court to be, to give information to the judge and reveal important information so that the judges can decide the court, right? The court decision, right? Therefore, I think that having victims to meet criminals is symmetrical on both sides, and I think it's even better if those victims actually meet judges, actually meet the criminals in order to explore their needs, and which can only be done under our side of the house, because you as victims cannot tell judges that you need you need money, you need trauma repairment, for examples, because that's not what CGS cater in their side of the house. But second response to this, even if at the worst case scenario that victims doesn't really want to meet perpetrator, I think that they're not going to choose this mechanism in the first place, because our case is based on choice and not forcing everyone. This house supports, not this house would want to force everyone to use this mechanism, right? I think that it's far more dangerous under their side, because perpetrators would counter sue the victims if you have lacking evidence under your side, right? But thirdly, they told you how negotiation is short and will be very biased under our side. Several responses. One, I think that sure, bias exists, but it's clashing bias from both sides, right? Naturally, victim will always champion their needs to maximum extent, and criminals will also champion their needs to maximum extent. What happens then in that case? I think that there will be deadlock in a discussion, in a negotiation, right? And I think that this is good. Not that because it's deadlock, but because it will moderate the discussion, right? It's going to tone down their biases so that they achieve concession and agreement, as opposed to just leaving negotiation with no result at all. Moreover, mediator and attorney also exist to balance biases, because they are more objective when engaging to negotiation, right? So therefore, I think that biases exist, but it's okay because there's counterbalance to it. But second response to this, even if the biases is so strong and no concession is achieved, I think that even if the biases is so strong and no concession will be achieved, I think that it's not like this case won't be solved at all under our side DOS. Then by default, you're going to run to CGS, right? But what's important is giving chance for them to do negotiation and maximizing their interest in the first place, which is not even an option under side opposition, right? So therefore, I think that when cases will be solved anyway under both sides, at least we give them the agency to decide things based on their interest, right? So second issue then, in regards to criminals, what are the things related to criminals that we should talk about? Rehabilitation, keeping, deterrence, and yada yada, right? Firstly, in regards to deterrence that they champion about, several responses to this. Number one, I think that deterrence will also exist on our side in two forms. For example, people who do brutal criminal crimes like rapists or maybe mass murder will still be put in jail, so therefore deterrence will also apply to them. But secondly, I think that even if the crime are settled by a negotiation, the fact that you need to pay certain amount of money to solve the crimes also serve as a form of deterrence to you, because maybe you got broke from it or whatever, right? But second response to this, okay, we can see that you cannot have all in nature, because either method is restrictive, because if you emphasize punishment, you don't care about victim, and vice versa, right? But what's more important in this debate is catering the victim's needs. I think that deterrence is not that important as opposed to this, right? Because if you want to talk about deterrence, I think that it's also counterbalanced in our side. Even if people do crime again, there are security that will catch them or whatever. For instance, I think that for all those reasons, very proud to propose.
Right, I think the third affirmative for that speech. For final responses against the affirmative, I call upon the third negative here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Before I start, just a disclaimer. I'm sorry if the content of my speech may be uncomfortable. It's just for the sake of the debate. start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Before going on to my clashes, one point of clarification, right? I think government needs to make their case consistent because they think that evil crime like murder and sexual assault should still be prosecuted by the CGS to a certain extent. But then they also argue to you how their principle in which like justified the act of criminals like terrorism and murders because it's something that they cannot control and due to the mistake of government, right? So we think that there is inconsistency inside their case, right? There's two things based on this inconsistency. I think first they need to bite the bullet and explain more likelihood as to why all crime should be justified and to be forgiven, even when it's murder, even when it's sexual assault, right? Because there is no layer of explanation coming from them, right? But second, with that they also need to explain to us why only small crimes are okay to use restorative justice, right? Because if you really think about it, the impact will still be harmful to these victims and people around them, right? And even to the state. For example, right, even when it's only a thief or like stealing crimes, right? If they stole money from neighborhoods that have like that consist of like low economic people, for example, the impact will still be big anyway, right? So we don't understand why they want to a certain extent limit this debate to only small crime cases because it's also as impactful and as harmful to these people and to the livelihood of these people, right? So there's no explanation. They should not be credited for whatever they talk about in this debate, right? But 2 points of clashes then. First, I'm going to talk about how does this going to be beneficial for the victims. But second, I'm going to talk about is it justified to do this to the perpetrators, right? The first clash then regarding the victims, right? First, they told you how the needs of this victim will be catered more through the fair settlement, right? Several responses. First, we don't think it will, right? Why will people want to do that to begin with? Rizky has told you these two characteristics, right? As to A, the victims will probably feel extremely angry to the perpetrators. They don't want to meet them, or at the very least, they're unable to settle for a reasonable compensation, right? They most likely want like a very high compensation because they feel like they're angry and they feel like it's unjustified for whatever payment that these perpetrators are willing to pay, right? But B, I think the perpetrators probably wouldn't be able to meet the condition or the compensation that the victim want, right? Because we think that there's this perpetrators, especially like how government try to portray it, is coming from like also a low economic background. Like we don't understand how the perpetrators then will be able to like pay for the compensation and whatnot, right? So it's impossible to begin with. The second response, then, moreover, right, within compensation still exists in our server house and within the professional consideration of lawyer and judges, right? That is to say, we think victims can still ask for what they want and what they think is fair. And even better, I think that this demand will be more ideal as it also rechecked and rebalanced by the judges and the lawyers, right? The delta is, no matter what the victim wants, we will still follow the basic guideline of law based on the principle of like criminal justice system, right? They cannot argue in their sort of house that lawyer and judges will still exist in their sort of house, right? Because they're not going to exist during the negotiation of the restorative justice, right? Within this, because restorative justice does not aim to decide whether this crime is guilty or not. The judge and lawyer is not needed inside the discussion, right? What is provided is like a mediator that aim to find peace, right? They do not try to through the crime, but focus on closing the case, right? You cannot argue that it will be fair in their sort of house because this judge and lawyer will not be involved in deciding like the compensation or in deciding the discussion because the job of this judge and lawyer is to find whether it's guilty or not, right? There will be only mediator who have the aim to close the case and find peace, and we don't think it's going to be fair in their sort of house, right? But more responses, right? Even if some people agree to do so, right? For whatever reason, this victim agree to do this, right? We think this is bad. Why? We think it's most likely because this will become a tool that will be used by privileged perpetrators to get away with their crimes towards underprivileged victims, right? No, we're not saying that this is a coercion inside the mediation, but what we're trying to say is that based on their situation, money has become more tempting when you come from an underprivileged background, right? This is so important because in the current status quo, this is how most crime is, right? Abuse to sex workers, abuse to waiters, abuse to your employees, right? This is a crime that done mostly because of non-symmetric bargaining power and privileges, right? This is exactly why CGS need to be done not only by the wisdom of the victims that probably are limited by their financial capability, their emotional capacity, and way of thinking. Instead, the criminal justice system should be based on the wisdom of the way justice operates and the way the retribution principle towards the perpetrators, right? But let's engage to their best case scenario, right? Why do we think that it's still bad? We then express the narrative as to how perpetrators have the opportunity to avoid real-time imprisonment, right? Even when they have to pay like for $1 million, for example, we think the fact that society know that some perpetrators are able to breathe free air, for example, due to the system, it will lead to a massive insecurity inside the society, right? This is why justice is important, right? This is not only about closure or catering to the victims, it's also about the fundamental principle of justice, right? So there's 3 points of weighing in this particular point. First, we have to you how that there is a mechanism that is probably we have proof to you that their mechanism is not feasible to begin with, right? We don't understand how the victim will probably want to comply, how it's going to be fair at the very least, right? But second point of weighing, even when it's visible, we think the outcome will be better in our sort of house, right? Look, the victim can still ask for compensation within the outcome of the court will still be more fair and catering to the principle of justice. We think it's going to be it's more likely in our sort of house. But third point of weighing, we think that it's not about compensation anywhere. Right? The main point is about the narrative of CGS in the general society and how people will constantly demand for justice in their sort of house. That's going to be a bad outcome. We're so proud to oppose, right? But second point in this particular class regarding rehabilitation to the victims, right? Several responses into this. First, I think it's offensive when government said that not everyone wants to bring the case to the criminal justice system, right? For the last decades, minorities all around the world are fighting for their opportunity to win in CGS, how they're willing to sacrifice their whole lot in order to be put their perpetrators in jail, right? Please do reality check. But second, even if we have to bite the bullet as to how this victim will have to recall the crime and whatnot, and it's too tiring for them, we have alternative, right? Lawyer, medical assistants, psychiatrists exist, right? Then even in the case where victims are having a hard time, court try to adapt that by having the victims being represented by the lawyer or take like a few months of break to understand the victims, right? But lastly, then, the most importantly, they argue that to you that people will only use restorative justice if they want it. So it's within the interest and the comfortability of these victims, right? Within this is untrue, right? Why is that so? First, by the popularization and the glorification of this method, society will teach you that you are capable and supposed to opt into this method, right? You have to be forgiving and you have to close the case, and there is no point to prolong this crime, right? The pressure comes from the normalization of the use of this method, right? This is especially bad for people who live around the perpetrators, i.e. when the perpetrators is in your own family, your teacher, your neighborhoods. People will constantly ask you to use this restorative justice and say to you that it's okay, it's the right thing for you to close the case, right? There's a external pressure in the government side of the house, make it unconsented to begin with, right? But second thing, we think this is the easiest access to gain money, right? Presumably, if you need money or if you need someone to pay for your child's education fee as a replacement of your murdered father, murdered husband, for example, you will eventually give up and opt into restorative justice, right? You don't actually want to do this. You really want to imprison the perpetrators that kill your husband, but you don't actually do this because you care about your children, right? We think that's a manipulative consent to begin with. Right? You don't necessarily give them the choice to begin with because you know they need money and whatnot. So we don't think it's consented to begin with, right? But again, like they also told you about how they told you about how people who actually you don't actually listen to what people need. They told you that the government is the only one who listens to what the people want, right? Yes, we do, right? That's why we are called to be witness, public defenders, consult with them. There's still like this process of discussion and whatnot. Right? But even if I think government also do not listen to what the state want, right? Because it's symmetric at worst, right? Because state also want justice, state also want the uphold of this principle, right? But thirdly, even if we question whether what victim wants will have the access to what they want, right? We told you like A, they're likely to be reluctant because they hate the perpetrators, so they do not want to meet and to have discussion to begin with. But B, I think that when they told you, they just need therapy, is horrible, right? Because you don't have epistemic access to what the victims want. So we think at the end of the day, we're actually catering to what the victims want. We are so proud to oppose. Thank you.
Okay, I think the third negative for that speech, yeah, to summarize the ops case, I call upon the opposition reply here.
Can I be heard?
Yes.
All right, give me a sec. Sorry. If you think that our case is very legal centric, it's probably because it is. And I'm proud to say that it is, because what we did with that was to mechanize every a priori principle and every pragmatic application that we set. What that side of the house offers is nothing but uncertainty and a fundamental deprivation of rights by the most vulnerable that you ought protect as a state. Three questions that I seek to address.
Justin.
Sorry?
Justin, I think it's a little bit lagging. Or
really?
is it just me? Make or Alvin, can you confirm? Oh, aman. Okay. All right. Bentar ya Justin, tethering dulu.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, check. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, Justin, you can restart from the top for your public speech.
Okay.
So sorry, yeah.
Okay, sure. If you think our case is very legal centric, it's probably because it is. And I'm proud to say that it is, because what we did with that was to mechanize every single a priori principle and every pragmatic implications that we said. What that side of the house offered is nothing but uncertainty and a fundamental deprivation of rights by the most vulnerable that you ought protect as a state. Three questions that I seek to address in this speech, each will independently win us the debate even without dividing the other, although I see no reason why it should. Firstly, on principle. Secondly, on the outcome for the widespread implementation for victims and the perpetrators, and lastly, what happens to the criminal justice system. On principle, we told you three things in all. Number one, we told you that a crime fundamentally harms the state. So principally, the state ought to have a say. Like it's a really simple, like correlative relationship, right? If someone is harmed, then probably you ought to have a say in to determine how that looks like. And even if that side offers everything to you, then it's still not legally correct. I'm gonna tell you why that wins us around. Number two, what we told you was proportionality, right? If you do crime, you ought to be punished. The response that we got from that side was, but they don't consent. They do it because it's forced. This is not only a horrible response because empirically it's untrue. Not every poor people opt into committing crime. And by you saying that, it means that the disgusting sentiment that every poor people ought to do that, which like the criminal justice system not only punishes the bad, but also it rewards the good. So you make no clear distinction in that side of the house because you say that the bad people do it because they're justified. It makes absolutely no reason why the good people ought not do that as well. But lastly, what we told you was about the tenants rehabilitation. No, this is not a priori, right? Like this relies on a lot of externalities. And I want to prove why the externalities will be good. But notably, what we told you was that prison reports are going to be better in our side of the house because of all the structural reasons that we have told you before, never responded by their side of the house. What we told you was that in their side, prison is going to be substantially worse for the people, for the worst kind of people that they're still going to put to prison in that side. So this already wins because the decisions made by judges are based on law principle rather than pragmatic consequences. Insofar as we prove this, we win the debate already. But secondly, let's be charitable. Let's talk about the outcome of the widespread implementation for victims and perpetrators. We told you three things. Number one, we told you that during the process, this harms the victims, and generally because they don't want to see the perpetrator, they feel traumatized and all those stuff. Two horrible responses we heard from Satvika. Number one, they said that but they're also called to witness in a regular court case. The difference is that we can choose, right? This is what we told you. So agency is one under opposition. In their side, you cannot choose because the only avenue for you to get any justice at all is to go through this mediation. The second response that they gave was, but you can choose. This is not force. Not as if we force everything to be restorative. Like if this is a new, then we question this question the entire stance because notice, right? Their benefits rely on this being widespread and universally applicable. Changing the stance at whip is not only weird, but also that's strategically bad for their side. The second thing they told you was that, but you ignored the needs of the victims. Number one, we told you we still consult with them and all those stuff. Secondly, we told you that even if we ignore it to some extent, they also ignore it to some extent. So it's at best symmetric. But lastly, it's unclear where they have access to that. What we told you was that you have no access to what the victim wants, even if you know that. We had no responses. The only response that they gave was, but this isn't a bribe if the victim takes it and if the victim agrees. This is a good response for a case that we did not run. You're likely, what we told you was that it's not because of the bribe, it's not because of the money. It's likely because you have less evidence to convict the people. Therefore, you have low bargaining power. You don't have access to get what you want. Lastly, on perpetrator, we flipped Brian's analysis by saying that people are afraid because the perpetrator killed someone yesterday and now they're already on the street. Satvika wisely did not bring this because it's already a losing part. But then this gives this into opposition because we proved to you a perpetrator will appreciate the better in our anyway. Lastly, on criminal justice system. Firstly, what we told you was that confidentiality is horrible in criminal justice system. And note this, I don't really understand why they didn't even try to respond to this. So I told you it was 4 implications. Number 1, you have no reference of future cases. Number 2, similar victims of similar cases cannot discuss because of the NDA. Thirdly, judge and jury cannot intervene. You have no check and balance. And lastly, society cannot necessarily condemn because you don't know what is inside that. But the second thing that we told you about the decision is horrible. New mechanism from DPM was that going to court. New mechanism from government was that you can choose to go to court. What we told you was you're likely to follow the powerful figures. You have no accountability. And the obvious response of a rich lawyer obviously disproves us because we have objectivity and accountability. We abide by law principles, we protect victims, and we make perpetrator perceive good. You rarely see all 3 proven in the debate, and so far as to prove this, we think that these are all good enough reasons for you to negate.
All right, I think the negative reply for that speech, to summarize the affirmative and also to close this debate as a whole, I call upon the affirmative reply. Check, affirmative reply.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Cool. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. There are 2 contributions that sorry. wait a minute. I have a disturbance.
Okay, while you're at it, can I go for a toilet break for a while?
Sure, you can. I'm
Okay.
already back though.
Oh yeah. For the others, do you want to go to the toilet as well? Okay, wait.
I'm sorry, can I start? Oh, wait for Kak Jia, ya. Okay.
Okay, hi, I'm back.
Okay, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. An eye for an eye make the world blind. Maybe it's true what Justin said, we are already blind. But guess what? We should not make the future generation blind as well by continuing to serve our thirst for vengeance that cause recidivism and expose more people to the damage of future crime while ignoring the injustice and rights of the so-called villain of status quo we are very proud to propose. There are 2 of our contributions that have a lot of analysis left untouched by opposition. First, the first point is that restorative justice is the mostly just legal approach. for 3 reasons. First, a lot of crimes that happen because government failure. Thus, we need to give criminal reparation in the form of restorative justice. The principal analysis about murder and assault is not inconsistency with the framing why we should not focus on the worst case practicalities. We call that engagement to multiple scenarios, which we don't find in UP. Second reason, yes, we agree not all poor people do crime, but even the ones that does crime still cannot be blamed and punished. This is what I said in PM. Listen, instead of accusing us of gross bias, why they don't deserve punishment anyway? Because the people have different threshold in their ability to hold pain. Some people succumb to hunger and decide to do crime, while some people does not. This is why I don't get depressed when I get D in linear algebra, but Reinhardt probably did. People just have different strength. Punishing the weak that can't control it is simply unjust. Third reason is that we do not have free will and agency. Human brain that is shaped without our control due to DNA and natural process. And this thing is the thing that makes all of our decision independent from our consciousness arbitrarily. As such, we think as a response to this modern discovery, we should leave the medieval conception of punishment behind, as no human have free will, thus should not get retribution. I think this is generally untouched by UP. Second contribution, we argue to you that recidivism will be prevented better under restorative justice because there will be no unnecessary dirt in the track record of ex-convict that will hamper their future opportunities. We also provide and focus more on rehab that will hopefully heal the perpetrator and remove their motive of crime. This is mutually exclusive with the retribution and jail or anything other that thus exclusive in us due to restorative justice focus. We find zero analysis by preventing recidivism with tough on crime approach in UP is possible. Notice, whatever defense they try to bring to you, like private prison or whatever other mechanism, it's not exclusive in our side. And actually, those are things that aligns with the principle of restorative justice. The goal of the private prison or whatever that they want to give is giving better facility to prisoners to heal, which actually, in a sense, agreeing with our stance, those are the things that you will actually see in our side, not them. Regardless of anything else, we already win due to these points that are left standing. Now I'm going to tell you, judges, how you should weigh UP's argument. First, let's talk about the victim protection. Notice that their focus is talking about the worst condition possible, like conservative areas that will force victim of rape to mediation, or powerful individuals that can manipulate the negotiation. Sure, mediation is not ideal in these situations, but that is not enough to win the clash. They never told you where in conservative area, the judge and jury will side to the victim or even bother to respond to the sexual assault case being reported. Therefore, they have, but furthermore, they also never explain why powerful individuals like Hambur cannot manipulate the court, zero counterfactual. The tipping point under our side is simple. At least under our side, the victim will have protection because they do not need to go to police investigation or court proceeding that is much more confrontative and triggering for the victim. Furthermore, at least restorative justice focuses healing on both sides, including victim. So under our side, victims will have more access to therapy and what not. But furthermore, we also told you victims' demand is diverse and isn't always prison that is provided by the penal code. Lastly, let's talk about the legal argument. Just because legal system rewarding good does not justify why you should does not analyze or prove why we should always punish the bad. This is even if it justifies their approach of punitive justice, it does not answer why restorative justice is bad. Therefore, I think that does not engage to our legal arguments for propose.
All right, I think the affirmative reply for that speech. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. That marks the end of the debate. Please wait here. Do not go anywhere while I deliberate my decision with the other judges. So for Alvin and also May, let's go to Discord. Oh, kita need B01. Okay, see you there.